everybody. I love starting off the new year thinking about what to focus on. And that's why our first live training of 2021 is about 5 key financial indicators for 2021. I hope you're always thinking about some key financial indicators. And I want to start off with just a really nice little story that showed up in my email box over the holidays. A client of mine was off to set her budget. I remember we first met looking at her budget, and the process was really not going so well with her board, and they were getting into the weeds, and it was confusing and difficult. Well, she used the ultimate nonprofit budget template that I give away. All of you can have it. I'll give you the link at the end of today's training. And she said that to me over break that she met with her new finance committee today, and they loved the new format and were really impressed by how easy it was to view. And she said, we didn't get into the weeds at all. Who's had that problem with their board? They've gotten into the weeds on your budget. She says, we discussed a handful of things, and once a few changes are made, they're prepared to pass the budget in early January. I can't tell you what a difference this is compared to last year, she says. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about what is it about this budget template. 4 of the 5 key indicators I'm going to tell you about are in that budget template. And they are one of the reasons why that budget template works so well. So let me get started here with our first indicator. Indicator number 1 is contribution margin. This can be in your budget. Let me tell you what it is and why it's important. Your contribution margin is the amount of income that you get from your programs, whether you're charging for them or maybe they're grant funded. I would count that as program income too, if it's restricted to that program, minus the expenses that are directly for that program, supplies, transportation, whatever it is, marketing just for that program. And then you're going to also subtract the labor for that program. So minus the regular expenses for that program that are direct for it, and minus that program's labor. So once you've taken basically all of the expenses and labor out of the income, you're left with your contribution margin. How can you remember what this number means? Contribution margin. It's the amount of money that that program contributes to the rest of your general operating expenses that you can't slice and dice specifically for each program. And why is that important? Because you need some money. You want to, make sure each program is generating a reasonable amount of contribution margin, because it does cost to keep other things running and that program running, even if you didn't put it in that program budget specifically. Also, it's important for you to be able to justify. Some programs, you might expect them to actually generate a lot of money and be a pretty good percentage return. Other programs, you might allow them essentially to take a loss, to be a drag on the organization financially, because they make such a big impact. And you know that there are lots of stories in there for you to fundraise around. So this year, one of the 5 things I want you to watch is to know the contribution margin for each of the programs in your organization. That's number 1. Number 2 is your, I'm going to call it, and I have made up this term, but you are welcome to use it and spread it, your net impact operating income. Boy, does that sound like a mouthful. Net impact operating income. But it sounds kind of good, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean, all of your non-fundraising income minus all of your non-fundraising expenses. So you're basically going to take the contribution margin from all of your programs and then subtract out all of your operating costs, but you're not going to include fundraising income. You're not going to include fundraising expenses. You're not going to include staff that are primarily working on fundraising, right? And so this is going to be your new bottom line, and it very well may be negative, and that's okay, of how much your program costs without fundraising built in. And I'll tell you a story about why this number is in here. I can't tell you how many times I've seen boards and EDs struggle trying to, quote, balance their budget, and maybe they add a little more fundraising and they take away a few more expenses. Well, you don't really have a good grip on it because your fundraising income is kind of a best guess, right? And if it's something you're struggling with, it could actually be a wild guess. And we really want to separate those things out so we have a good grip on what are our program income and expenses? What does it look like at the end of the day without finagling the fundraising? And then when we put the fundraising in, we certainly don't want to be in the negative if we can avoid it, unless we're building our fundraising capacity. So that's number 2, your net impact operating income. It's your net income, all income after expenses, but nothing relating to fundraising. It's the pure impact part of your organization. Let's go on to number 3. Three is, sorry, it's slipping. My computer is doing something weird on me. 3 is income generating expenses. I may have made up this term too, but I made it up a while ago, so I'm going to count it as acceptable. What do I mean by income generating expenses? And this is going to be new for a lot of people, but I want you to know which line items on your budget are expenditures that actually cause more income to come in. This could be marketing. This could be fundraising. This could be grant expenses towards grant writing and management. This could be hiring a consultant to help you figure out the best ways to bring in more money, whether it's fundraising money or program generated money, right? Anything that you spend money on for the purpose of bringing more money in is an income generating expense. And I want you to get a grip on which of those expenses are income generating in your budget, and make sure that when you're like, we don't have enough money, that you are increasing, not decreasing, your income generating expenses. Your non-income generating expenses you can cut to save money when you're worried about money. But I doubt that any of you are overspending. There might be smarter ways to spend, but this is basically, when it comes to the financials, this is a lever you want to increase if you want more money next year than this year. So if you want more money in 2021, increase your income generating expenses and ideally spend it as wisely as you can. That always goes for any expense. Spend it as wisely as you're able to. Number 4 here is not in your budget. This is the yield curve, and you can Google yield curve in a 15-minute training. I'm not going to go into the science of it. This is an economic indicator, right? It actually has to do with treasury rates, but don't worry about that. You can Google the yield curve, and you want to watch for what's called an inverted curve. And I'm going to show that to you on the next slide. See, here's the thing about the yield curve. This is a measurement of the US economy. Some people call it a predictor. I wouldn't do that. I call it an indicator. See these red lines here? These red arrows, these are marking each time the yield curve has gone below 0. That black line is 0. And since basically the 1950s, every time that has happened, a recession has followed within 5 to 18 months. So you see these gray bars, those gray sections kind of running horizontal, those mark recessions. So what I love about the yield curve is it is an indicator that in the coming months to year and a half, there's going to be a recession, pretty likely. And that is great because it gives you, it's not great to have a recession, but it's great because this actually gives you enough time to prepare for a recession. Now, do you see that red arrow to the far right? The yield curve inverted at the very end of 2019. So those who were savvy last year they didn't know about the pandemic, and the pandemic has very little to do with the yield curve, but they were already prepared for the recession that we're having now. Now, I'm sure coronavirus has made it look a little different, but the basic things that you need to have in place to be prepared for a recession remain the same. So if you were watching the yield curve a year ago, you would have been ready regardless of your knowledge around the coronavirus, or you would have had the opportunity to be ready. So from now on, I want you to check in on the yield curve every few months. Fortunately, we are now on the up, which means we are likely to be headed not for more recession, but for a recovery, and that could take quite a while. But I do want you to get used to checking now and then on the yield curve, or when you listen to the news, if you hear someone say the yield curve has been inverted, that's ding, 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 time to prepare for a recession. Which brings me to item number 5, which might be in your budget. It might be in your balance sheet. Maybe your accountant prepares it for you, or if you're not adding it up, I want you to add it up. This could be your LUNA, which is a beautiful acronym for your liquid, unrestricted net assets, which translates to access to cash. So this could be cash in the bank that you can spend. This could be an available credit line. I know I talked about this with some of the people in the Thrive program. The best time to expand your credit, to ask for credit for a loan, is when you don't need it. So if you're thinking, well, what should we do to make ourselves more depression proof or recession proof, you should, when you don't need it, get some lines of credit or expand your lines of credit and save that availability, right? That's just access to cash. So you have that in the future. You don't need to spend it, just get access to it now. It could be things like, a CD could be locked up for a bit, but anything that you can turn into cash pretty easily, like stocks, you can sell them at any time. They can be turned into cash easily. So that's called a liquid asset, and unrestricted, meaning you're allowed to spend it on anything you want. So I want you to be aware this year, especially, what your access to cash is like. And when we're dealing with times of uncertainty, whether or not it's a recession, we want to have more cash. Or, if we want to make a big growth spurt, we also want to have access to more cash, because in times of uncertainty, those with cash will be able to take advantage of opportunities. And those who are on the opposite end, who are just dealing with debt and have very little cash, they will have challenge after challenge after challenge. And believe me, today, in today's environment, those of you who are just lapping up opportunities are very happy. And I maybe can't help you if you already made this mistake, but you can start thinking about it for the future. So watch that yield curve. And when that yield curve dips below 0 or goes inverted, you're going to be like, whoops, let's start hoarding cash in the bank, or eat something that's easy to turn into cash. Now, if you're wondering about the template I mentioned, you can go to the link on the bottom here, pivotground.com/budget-template, and you can download the template, which has all of these budget line item and calculations in it, along with a lot of other goodies and a little instruction video on how to use it. And as always, if you'd like to have a call with me one-on-one, I would encourage you to apply for a call.